Welcome back to my shop. I thought for this video we would do a bit of a shop tour. And rather than just walking around the shop, I'm going to make something which is going to use most of the equipment in my shop, I think. I have a booth downtown where I try to sell stuff I make. I made a temporary sign about a year ago. It's just a slab of pecan and it hangs on the wall with a cleat. And I want to make something that's kind of more 3D. So I've got a leftover disc here, which I will use to make part of my logo. And I'll try to make it a bit more three-dimensional, but we should be able to work through the shop. So the first piece of equipment I think we'll use is the CNC machine to machine my logo into here. I will spare you the painful process of me figuring out how to turn my logo into the files for the CNC, and we'll just go ahead and load it up and start that. A couple of particulars before we get started. My shop is built on my property, and it's 30 foot by 50 foot. There's 24 8-foot fluorescent bulbs, and they're starting to fail. It's been 5 years. I've gone through my spares. I don't want to replace the fluorescents because they're hard to get rid of. Some people take them to the dump, but because there's mercury in there, I'm going to do the right thing and ship them away for proper disposal. So I am looking to switch over to LEDs. So I'm kind of researching that now. Okay, back to the build. My CNC is a Powermatic. It's a 2 foot by 4 foot bed. I probably don't keep this busy enough, but it is very handy to have. I normally use clamps, but and the clamps of course go into the outside, but because it's going to do a saw blade pattern on the outside, I can't use clamps. So people do use double-sided tape, but screws I think will just be more secure. So now I have to set the X and Y to the center of the board, and the height of the bit, which is 1/8 of an inch end mill, I need to set that height. So that's what I'm going to do now. Okay, I think that's pretty good. So I'm going to set the X and Y to 0, and I'm going to raise the bit, and then put in the sensor so I can set my height of the bit. Okay, now it's ready to go. All I need to do is run the program that I loaded onto the thumb drive. All right, so the first file that I did the saw blade and the text. And I have some trees in my logo, and so I have for some reason I had to do a different file for that, even though it's the same cutting bit. So I'm just going to select that here off my thumb drive. that part's done. I'm going to fill these with epoxy, clean them out. I'll do green epoxy in the trees and then black epoxy everywhere else. But I have the banner that goes across, and so I thought I'd do that out of cherry. So I'm just going to prep the cherry on my equipment. In the back of my shop is where I have all my dust collection set up. Over my right shoulder, I have my bandsaw. Over my left shoulder is an 8-inch joiner. And then I have my 14-inch planer and a 2-foot drum sander. And I'm sitting on my table saw. A big bottleneck in my shop is the 8-inch joiner. I've got my own sawmill, and I can do boards that are about 24 inches. And so my limiting factor here is the 8-inch joiner. I know you can cheat that a little bit and do a little bit wider boards, but I'd like to upgrade that to a 12-inch. Going back to the joiner, an 8-inch joiner is pretty affordable. That's not 8 inches. The 8-inch joiner is pretty affordable, but when you jump to 12, they really go up in price. So I'm looking for a used one. Okay, we're going to do the banner. That's going to go across my logo now. This is a piece of cherry that I just milled down, and this should. Just going to clamp this down because I should be clear of the edges. All right, it's done. I vacuumed it off. Looks good. It doesn't go all the way through this piece because the cutting edge is only a 1/2 inch deep, so I went about a 1/2 inch, and I will just put a flush trim router bit on my router table, and I'll cut it out on the bandsaw and clean it up. So I'm going to fill in all the text and the trees with epoxy. All the text gets black epoxy. The trees, I got some green to go in there, and hopefully it'll look good. There seems to be some really open grain here on the cherry, and so I'm going to just kind of brush that with the clear epoxy and let it set up for a few minutes before I pour black onto that. So that'll probably be the last thing I do. I'm using Total Boat epoxy, the tabletop, which is good for about 1/8 of an inch, which is all I'm doing. And I shall fill that up. So I've got my epoxy mixed. It's just a clear right now, and I'm just going to cover what looks like these really open grain part of the cherry. And then I'll mix in the black. pretty good. I'm gonna let this sit for a little bit longer. So in the meantime, I'm going to do the green. This needs to sit here for probably a couple of days, and then I'll scrape it off and start sanding. So I want my logo to sit inside a frame of barnwood. So I cut some metal this morning, cleaned it up, and I'm going to let Dummy here weld it up. Just inside my roll-up door on the left is my welding area. I have a MIG machine and a TIG machine. I'm not going to get too far into it. At some point I'll do a video on welding for woodworkers or people who like to upcycle stuff. Welding is quite similar to woodworking. I find it hard to make things square. It's the same with welding, especially when you're adding heat and you're melting metal together. There's a lot of expansion and contraction when things cool, and it's hard to make things square. And you can never have too many clamps. I know some of you are watching this video and saying that, hey, you can get lenses for the inside of your helmet so you don't need to wear your glasses. And they're already in there. My eyes have gotten that bad. Once I'm done welding this up, we will go to the barn and get some barn wood to put inside the frame. All right. That's the frame done. Just going to take a quick measurement here. So we're nearly 2 feet, and I think it's 32 inches. So let's go to the barn and get some wood to go in here. Hey, Bert. Hi, Ernie. This is my sawmill. It's a Cook's 32. I think the 32 stands for a 32-inch diameter log that you can do, but by the time you get it all squared up, you're only looking at about 24 inches. Once I cut the wood, I go into my barn to dry it. Just a little bit of everything in here: poplar, white oak, red oak. Once I cut the wood with the sawmill, we stack it in here and then let it dry for about 6 months, and then it's ready for the kiln. And we'll come out the back side of the barn, and this is one of the pieces I want to use for my new sign. I'm not sure there's enough there, so I think I'll have to get 2 pieces. Hopefully the first one was the hard one. Perfect. Okay, got my barn wood back here. Got my frame. I'm going to knock the nails out, start fitting it in there, see how it looks. Gives us a better idea what we're looking at. I like it. I'm going to stain the blade gray, and then I'll hang it with a cleat in the back. I left the nail holes in there. I think it looks pretty good that way. So I don't think this is quite dry yet, so I still need to scrape this. I might use a couple of biscuits to glue this all together. And I'll put some holes in the frame so that I can screw the wood there. If I'm doing a lot of work on the machines, I will put in earplugs. I like the ISO tunes, but maybe I just have a big head. But after a while, they really start crushing my head. My wife uses them when she's mowing the lawn, mostly. All right, I think we'll finish up the tour of the shop. There's only a few more things to see, and then we'll get to the kiln. So behind my welding bench over here, this is my heating system for the shop. It's the underfloor heating for the slab, and even in the winter, it has no problem keeping the temperature inside the shop at about 65 degrees. The slab sits on 2 inches of the polystyrene, and there is spray foam insulation everywhere. So it keeps it very comfortable. I don't really have a problem with the heat, but I don't like the cold, and I can continue working in here all winter. So moving along this wall, I've got my mortiser and a drill press. They're both on rolling stands. My clamp rack, very handy to have that rolling around. I've got a couple of these old tractor grills right here. These are a couple of projects coming up that I'm going to make some tables out of them. And this is a good time to please ask you to subscribe and comment, like, ask any questions. I'll be happy to answer them. Towards the back corner here, I've got my Craig jig hanging up there. Certainly one of the most useful tools in the shop. My hand planes, I've got a couple of Stanley bedrocks, 607, 605. I have a 605.5. There's an English infill scrub plane and a 604. I wish I used planes earlier. It's a lot more pleasant than sanding. It's also a lot more easy to screw up than sanding. And then we also have my layout tools, a couple more clamps, drills. I take little slabs, and that's how I keep all my bits for my driver, impact driver. Glue station, everything's a bit dusty back here. Of course, we've already gone through the power tools. Here's my bandsaw, just a closer look at it. It's a Grizzly. The only thing I don't like about it is the clearance here for resawing. It's only about 10 inches, and I'd like one a bit taller. So I might upgrade that. So this is the other side of the shop. Behind me is my lumber storage on the walls. It's a little messy right now. I'm just consolidating everything, getting ready to take some wood out of the kiln and making space for it. And then I have my industrial sewing machine here for doing canvas and leather. And I'll just say that I'm a much better welder than I am using a sewing machine, but I'm learning. I like to integrate the leather, wood, metal, whatever I can into stuff. On the floor here, there's some maple, slabs of maple that came out of the kiln last week, and I'll be making a few projects with them here in the next couple of weeks. I cleaned up my metal frame with a die grinder and Scotch-Brite pad, and I gave it a few coats of lacquer. Here's the completed sign, and I think it looks really good. It's a big improvement over the last one. In the end, I didn't end up staining the blade gray. I think it looked better just as the raw poplar, and I think it makes it stand out better against that barnwood. I made a couple of changes to the kiln. Sorry for the squeaking fans, but they're just getting started this morning. I wanted to make the covers for the vents, and I was going to do it on the outside, but I liked the way the outside looked, so I did something on the inside, and I just made these little flaps. I tried to get fancy and put a magnet in there, thinking I would just sink a screw in there and that would hold it shut, but the material surface isn't smooth enough, so I just made these little flaps. On Wednesday, our high temperature here was 70 degrees, but it got up to 127 inside the kiln. And that's with all the flaps, all 8 flaps, the 4 on the doors and the 4 up top, closed. So I'm really happy with that. I took out the load of lumber I had in there last week, or a couple weeks ago. I had 8/4 material, or 2 inches thick, and I didn't think with the time left of warm weather this year I was going to be able to get it dry, because it was only dropping about 2% a week. And so I took it out. There was some maple that was nice and dry. But I went to my barn and I got a bunch of 4/4 material that was pretty dry. So I'm just finishing that off. And that it appears it'll be done here in the next couple of days. The other change I made was I added a 12-inch strip of plywood to the bottom of the supports here for the acrylic. I could see whenever I walked by that the sun was beating on that front stack of wood, and that's not good. So I added this 12-inch strip and loaded the lumber right underneath it, and the tarp goes right up to it. It's not covering the front, so it doesn't disrupt the airflow, and that appears to be working very well. It was an issue this late in the year when the sun's quite low in the sky, so I know next year when the sun's high in the sky in spring and summer, it was going to be a problem. So that took care of that problem. If you made it this far in the video, congratulations. I covered a lot. But hey, thanks for watching, and please join me next time.